אז תבואנה 2 נשים זונות אל המלך ותעמודנה לפניו. ותאמר האישה האחת, בי אדוני, אני והאישה הזאת יושבות בבית אחד ואלד עמה בבית. ויהי ביום השלישי ללידתי, ותלד גם האישה הזאת, ואנחנו יחדיו, אין זר איתנו בבית זולתי, 2 אנחנו בבית. וימת בן האישה הזאת לילה אשר שכבה עליו. ותקם בתוך הלילה, ותיקח את בני מאצלי, ואמתך ישנה, ותשכיבהו בחיקה, ואת בנה המת השכיבה בחיקי. ואקום בבוקר להניק את בני, והנה מת, ואתבונן אליו בבוקר, והנה לא היה בני אשר ילדתי. ותאמר האישה האחרת, לא, כי בני החי ובנך המת, וזאת אומרת לא, כי בנך המת ובני החי, ותדברנה לפני המלך. ויאמר המלך, זאת אומרת זה בני החי ובנך המת, וזאת אומרת לא, כי בנך המת ובני החי. ויאמר המלך, קחו לי חרב, ויביאו החרב לפני המלך. ויאמר המלך, גזרו את הילד החי לשניים, ותנו את החצי לאחת, ואת החצי לאחת. ותאמר האישה אשר בנה החי אל המלך, כי נחמרו רחמיה על בנה, ותאמר, בי אדוני, תנו לה את הילוד החי, והמת אל תמיתוהו, וזאת אומרת, גם לי וגם לך לא יהיה, גזרו. ויען המלך ויאמר, תנו לה את הילוד החי, והמת לא תמיתוהו, היא אמו. וישמעו כל ישראל את המשפט אשר שפט המלך, ויראו מפני המלך, כי ראו כי חוכמת אלוהים בקרבו לעשות משפט. ספר מלכים א', פרק 3, פסוקים 16-28. After this, there came to the king 2 women who were prostitutes. After presenting themselves to him, one of the women said, My lord, I and this woman live in the same house, and when she was in the house, I gave birth to a baby. 3 days after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were there together. There was no one else with us in the house except the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's child died because she rolled over on top of it. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from next to me while your servant was sleeping and put it in her arms, and she laid her dead child in my arms. When I woke in the morning to feed my child from my breast, there it was, dead. But when I took a closer look later in the morning, why, it wasn't my son at all, not the one I gave birth to. The other woman broke in, No, the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. The first one said, No, the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. This is how they spoke in the presence of the king. Then the king said, This woman says, The living one is my son, your son is the dead one. While the other says, No, the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. Bring me a sword, said the king. They brought a sword to the king. The king said, Cut the living child in 2, give half to the one and half to the other. At this, the woman to whom the living child belonged addressed the king, because she felt so strongly toward her son. Oh, my lord, give her the living child. You mustn't kill it. But the other one said, It will neither be yours nor mine. Divide it up. Then the king answered, Give the living child to the first woman. Don't kill it, because she is its mother. All Israel heard of the decision the king had made and held the king in awe, for they saw that God's wisdom was in him, enabling him to render justice properly. From the book of 1 Kings, Melachim Aleph, chapter 3, verses 16 to 28. my throngs of listeners from all over the world, the long wait is over. I have returned. To you I bid you a shalom shalom uvruchim hashavim, peace be upon you and welcome back to an exhilaratingly abrasive and absolutely unpolitically correct episode 10 of Finding Higher Ground. Now fortified with even more essential uncensored vitamins and minerals that don't care about your feelings. Brought to you by none other than the slightly obnoxious, ever so charming, but always crunchy, Manic Messianic from Seattle, Washington, USA, your host, Gotti Higher. You know that I like to say thank you to a whole bunch of people, so here I go. First and foremost, I would very much like to thank Anchor, powered by Spotify. Thank you for believing in this project. Thank you for supporting me and sponsoring me. Without Anchor, I would not be able to be available on 7 different platforms. That's right, now Finding Higher Ground is available on these following platforms: Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, and Reason Podcasts. So once again, thank you Anchor and Spotify for making this dream a reality. Also, a special thank you to Audacity for making this happen with their absolutely free professional-grade audio mixing software. You can find this absolutely free amazing software at audacityteam.org. Of course, I also want to thank epidemicsound.com for a treasure trove of background music and special effects that are absolutely perfect for all your podcast needs. I'd like to acknowledge this one website, susancanthony.com. I will be sharing you an article regarding Canaanite culture, and we're going to take a look at that and see how that translates into modern day events. So stay tuned for that. This is going to be interesting indeed, to say the least. And of course, I cannot forget oneforisrael.org, who's given me permission, both written and verbal, to share with you their book, Reading Moses, Seeing Jesus. One for Israel Ministries, the spearhead ministry leading Israeli Jews, Arabs, and Palestinians to a richer knowledge in Messiah Yeshua. After all, this is who it really is all about in the first place. This is not about me, and this is definitely not about finding higher ground. This is all about Messiah Yeshua. Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Welcome back, my dear listeners. I am very, very humbled, both humbled and flattered by your returning attention, coming back to Spotify or whatever platform of your choice that you've been using, and coming and listening to me. Little old me that has no education. Yes, dear listeners, you've heard me correctly. I am not educated in these matters. I am merely approaching you from a point of my own experience. Also, I have absolutely no problem admitting that I thoroughly enjoy going on this journey with you, as I take you along with me on my mission to make the most famous Jewish person in history and in all the world even more famous. So, a very wise and delightful man whose name I shall omit at this point in time. It doesn't matter what his name is. It matters that he is a wonderfully charming, delightful person who has decided to take his time and share it with me and teach me certain secrets of the trade. If you are listening, sir, you know who you are, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Yeshua bless you, sir. So, one Sunday morning in my quote-unquote church, this wise Yoda Gandalf type comes up to me and says to me, "So, who is your target audience?" And my response was, "Well, everybody. I want to reach everybody." And he's like, no. Who's your target audience? And I'm like, And the grimace on my face was quite evident, and it was also very noticeable. Because I thought my answer was an awesome answer, but I was being challenged. So I accepted the challenge and thought deeper. After about a week of much pondering and thinking about this question, I met up with Mr. Yoda Gandalf over a cup of coffee, and I provided him with a much better answer to his question. My answer involved the analogy that I often use. I borrowed it from the movie The Matrix. It is the scene where Morpheus is explaining to Mr. Anderson about the Matrix. Now, something that you need to understand about me is that I regard the first Matrix movie to be somewhat prophetic. The other 3 movies are complete trash, but the first Matrix movie is special. By the time I'm done with this podcast, everything will connect, and it will make perfect, harmonious sense. Okay, so back to the Matrix movie. The scene that I'm referring to is the scene where Morpheus is explaining to Mr. Anderson just exactly what the Matrix is, and it's also the scene where Morpheus introduces the red pill and the blue pill to Mr. Anderson. This is very key, and I want you to remember this. Prophetic, remember. And I guess I need to say this as a disclaimer that I'm just going to pay the due respects to the creators of the movie, and I'm saying this so I don't get my ass sued off. So, all rights reserved to the creative artists who created The Matrix, yada yada yada, don't sue me. So, Mr. Anderson sits down in the chair, and Morpheus asks him, he says to him this: "I imagine that you are feeling a little bit somewhat like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole." Mr. Anderson says, "You can say that." Morpheus says, "I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he's expecting to wake up. Ironically, this is not far from the truth." Morpheus then proceeds to ask Mr. Anderson, Neo, if he believes in fate. Neo says to Morpheus, no. Morpheus's response is, "Why not?" "Because I don't like the idea that I'm not in control of my life," Neo answers. "I know exactly what you mean," Morpheus says. Morpheus then says to Neo, "Let me tell you why you're here." Listen closely, believers and non-believers, listeners, and all you seekers, serious seekers of truth out there, because this is where it gets good. "Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know, you can't explain, but you feel it. You have felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. So then Morpheus asks Neo, do you know what I'm talking about? And I'm going to ask you the same question, dear listener, believer and non-believer. Preferably, I'm kind of sort of talking to the non-believer right now. Do you know what I'm talking about? So Neo's response to that is the Matrix. So then Morpheus asks Neo, do you want to know what it is? Neo nods his head in approval. So Morpheus' response to Neo is, the Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window, or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. Neo asks Morpheus, what truth? And Morpheus' response is that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage. Born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Then Morpheus tells Neo, unfortunately one cannot be told what the Matrix is, you must see it for yourself. And then this is the moment that he introduces to Neo the red pill and the blue pill. Remember those pills and the colors of those pills, because this is going to make perfect sense later. Morpheus tells Neo, this is your last chance. After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed and you believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Now, this is where my analogy that I borrowed from the Matrix ends. But these are the people that I'm looking for. I'm looking for those individuals who know that there is something wrong with the world, and they don't exactly know what it is, but it's there. It's like a splinter in your mind driving you crazy, and you can't put your finger on it, and you want to know what it is. This is my target audience. I'm looking for serious seekers of truth. I'm looking for people who know, somehow know deep down in their bones, that they were made for something greater. They were made for something bigger. They were destined for more. You people out there that realize that there's no way in the world that we could be put here with what we can do with our amazing potential and be boxed into a prison. My fellow listeners, there's no way in the world that we are here. Look at what humanity can do. Yes, I know that we're capable of horrific things. I'm not blind to what's going on in Ukraine, but I'm also no stranger of war, as I myself have grown up in the state of Israel for 20 years, and I myself have served in Tzva Hagana L'Israel, the Israel Defense Force, so I'm no stranger to war. But I'm also no stranger to the potential of mankind, the great potential of humanity, and you cannot convince me that we were put here on this earth and designed to do the things that we can do just so that we can be put into a box and work our lives away and pay our taxes and just live this American life that you're living. by spending money, buying and selling and watching television, and being brainwashed by the mainstream media, and being told what to vote, who to vote for, and what to think. No. My fellow believers, non-believers, listeners across the world, we've been put here on this earth for something much, much greater than this. Mankind's destiny is much, much larger than just paying taxes and going about your mundane life. You were put here to have life and life in abundance. And the only way, my dear listener, that you can have this abundant life is to recognize and understand exactly who Messiah Yeshua, HaMashiach Yeshua, exactly who this person is. He is no mere man. He is the impossible become possible. To borrow Dr. Jordan Peterson's analogy, or, I'm going to kind of paraphrase his words again, because I've done it before. Yeshua the Messiah is not just the truth, he is the precondition of the manifestation, the precondition for the manifestation of truth, which makes him a whole lot more true than just true. So these podcasts that I record and publish every few weeks, I do this for you, dear listener, for the person who is looking for something greater. In order to find this something greater, there needs to be pride put down. I had to do this. I had to put my own pride down and recognize that Adonai Elohim does exist, and he's sovereign, and he can do what he wants to do, because he created all of it. Everything is by design, dear listener. The Earth's position in the solar system, the atmosphere, everything's by design. Everything's been put into place so that you could have a life, so that you could breathe and live and love. So if everything has been put here by design, that means that there must be a designer. Anything that has a design has a designer. So this podcast, this specific podcast, all of my podcasts go out to you. They go out to you, the one who's having a really, really bad day, who wants to just call it quits, who feels that they've hit rock bottom, who've lost all kinds of hope. This podcast goes out to the ones who are thinking about leaving their spouses, thinking about maybe things might be better if they cheat on their spouse and run off with another guy or girl. These podcasts are directed to the people who are eyeballs deep into black magic and have had enough of this and are sick of it and want a way out, and they don't know how to get out. These podcasts are dedicated to the people who think that they are beyond God's forgiveness. That is a lie. No one is beyond God's forgiveness, and it doesn't matter how far you think you've ran away from Him. All you have to do is turn around and He will be right there with arms wide open. Alright, so you might have been wondering why I decided to call episode 10 what I did. Episode 10, Cut the Baby in Half, A Tale of Two Hoes. What? Oh my gosh, what did I just say? Yes, A Tale of Two Hoes. You heard me correctly. I did not stutter, and I deliberately said that word. As you've heard, I read 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 to 28, and it deals with one king, two prostitutes, and a baby. Why in the world would I be talking about this archaic story in scripture about a wise king, two hoes, and a baby? And I say hoes, I put the stress on the prostitute thing because it's important to realize that nothing is in the Bible by accident. Everything that's in the Bible is important. And it makes the reader realize, it evens the playing field in the first sentence of the passage, that these two women were prostitutes. They be hoes. In the modern day vernacular, that's what would be said. They be hoes. So I don't think there's anything too wrong with what I just said. But Gotti, Mr. Manic Messianic, how in the world will this crazy story have anything to do with what's happening in the world today? Well, let's dive into it, shall we? Now I must make a disclaimer. I truly love you to the point of risking making a podcast among millions in the hopes that you just might hear some biblical wisdom from me, but I'm letting you know right now that the content of this podcast might be somewhat offensive to some people. That being said, please get over yourself, because the hurt you might feel from this podcast pales in comparison to the pain he took instead of you on that cross and in that grave. I said this podcast was fortified with essential uncensored vitamins and minerals that don't care about your feelings, and I'm gonna expand on that for a little bit. And it's not that I'm trying to be a callous poop head. I'm just here to tell you that the Word of God does not necessarily care about your feelings. God is not who you think He is. God is who He says He is. And He says who He says He is in His Word. If you want to know the character of Adonai Elohim, I suggest that you start reading His Word. Davar, spoken word, because it speaks to you when you read it. If you want to go for the full immersion experience, I of course am going to suggest that you get the Complete Jewish Study Bible, the secret weapon in church unification. Also, everything you wanted to know about Messiah Yeshua that your Goyish pastor won't tell you. Not because he's a bad guy, but simply because he just doesn't know. So I'm going to take you on a journey and show you how this biblical passage translates over and connects to, not only connects to, but relates to certain political occurrences that are happening in modern society today. Furthermore, in this journey, I'm going to show you how they connect to the Democrat National Committee and what they're doing to the country. Ooh, now I dropped a bomb. Yes, I dropped the political bomb. Why is this getting political? It has to. It has to get political. There's no other way around it, and you'll see why. All of this is connected. Hollywood, the mainstream media, the life you live, the politics you have to endure and swallow, the parties you vote for, everything's connected, and everything is orchestrated. The life that you live, dear listener, is not yours. It's the life that very rich people planned for you to have. It's not your life. There are very, very rich and powerful people that sit in dark rooms and think about these things, and they have the power to control what you see, what you hear, what you read, what you eat. The life that you live is not your life. It's given to you by the rich and powerful elite that want to control the world. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are facts, and they're playing out right in front of your face. Yes, and the COVID-19 vaccines and actual pandemic have a lot to do with it too. Before you ask me, I'm already going to tell you that I am not vaccinated. I'm one of them. I am unvaxxed and proud of it. I'm going to talk to you about a Mr. Saul Alinsky and how he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, and how he wrote a little acknowledgement to a certain someone in this book And by putting this acknowledgement to this one specific character in this book, this is the game changer. And this is why I'm bringing politics into this whole thing. There's no way out of it. Everything is connected. So Saul Alinsky, Mr. Saul Alinsky writes this book called Rules for Radicals, and he puts a little acknowledgement to a one character by the name of Lucifer in it. We're going to talk about that. Stick around. It's going to get very, very interesting. Also, through the same passage, we're going to take a hard look together at what it means to be dishonest, and why do people put so much effort in being shady instead of being honest, all while claiming that they love you, and what it exactly takes to get to a place of forgiveness. Trust me when I tell you that it's ridiculously hard to get to a place of forgiveness. But all things are possible through Messiah Yeshua, who strengthens you with his wonderful counselor, Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit of Adonai. Now, it might be a little hard for some people to wrap their brain around the idea that there are these kind of stories in Scripture. What is this? What is this whole story about a king cutting a baby in half? Well, it's important for me to stress that the Bible is not a rated G movie. This isn't DreamWorks, Pixar, or Disney, my dear listener. The living Word of God deals with real living issues. I am very well aware that there are a lot of people out there that will scream at me that the God of the Old Testament is a bloodthirsty, savage bully who likes to wipe out entire nations just for his amusement. I can assure you, my dear listener, that the God that I believe in is not a bloodthirsty God, and if he was, I wouldn't believe in him at all. He wouldn't have my allegiance and my trust and my love. This isn't how it works. Did he tell the people of Israel to wipe out entire nations, men, women, and children? Yes, he did, but there was a very good reason why he did those things, why he told Israel to do that. There is someone rather bloodthirsty here, but I promise you it is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Alright, so after bringing up the actual text in front of me, so now that I can take a deeper, clearer look at it, we're going to look at some highlights in the story. So like I said before, can't say it enough, the author levels out the playing field and establishes that the two women that we're dealing with are prostitutes. Okay. So the first woman, the first prostitute, tells the king her story, and she does it with great effectiveness and great detail. Perhaps she might consider giving up prostitution and becoming a defense attorney. I'm kidding. It's a joke. Anyway, don't mind me. So the first woman proceeds to tell her story that during the night this woman's child died because she rolled over on top of it. Now, of course, this could be an accident, but it could also suggest negligence. Based upon what she does next, I don't think it was an accident. I'm inclined to believe it was more negligence. Let's continue. So the second prostitute gets up in the middle of the night and she takes the son from next to her while your servant was sleeping, she says, and put it in her arms, and she lay her dead child in my arms. Stop. Now, I think that you have to ask yourself, what kind of person would do such a thing? What kind of moral anchor do you think this person has that she would not only smother her own son out of negligence, but then decide in the dark hours of the night to do this baby swap thing? How shady do you have to be? I also like to think that this woman who did this, the second prostitute, either did not follow this through in her mind, she didn't think this through in her head, or she did and she was that evil. I don't care that she's gonna wake up and find a dead baby in her bed. That's not my problem. Oh, but it really is her problem. When I awoke in the morning to feed my child from my breast, there it was, dead, but when I took a closer look later in the morning, why, it wasn't my son at all, not the one I gave birth to. And the other woman chimes in, no, the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. And then they go back and forth, all doing this in front of the king. So, by the way, if you haven't figured it out yet, the king in question here is King Solomon, King David's son. But this happens, well, he's like in his 30s. You know, not a little boy, not an old man. This is in the beginning of his reign. So he's like a young, strapping lad of maybe, I don't know how old. Let's say 30. So Solomon's like, this woman says this, and this is the other woman says this. You know what? I got this. Bring me a sword. Alright, now, Solomon says, cut the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Stop. Do you really think that Solomon was a cold-hearted a-hole that didn't care about the child or the mom or whatnot? Because the initial reaction to such a thing would be, what? Why is this person wanting to cut a baby in half? What an outrageous thing to do. Gee, what a really not nice guy. Of course, other people would use much more savory language, but I'm trying to keep it a little, not salty. If a bad word slips, I think that we're all adults here and you'll be able to forgive me. But look, I'm not sugarcoating anything, and like I said, this might be hard for some people to hear. So if I might drop a word of profanity here and there, I'm not doing it to be vulgar. I'm doing it to emphasize a point. With that being said, there is a great effort to make this all a little bit more presentable. So King Solomon, let's take a good hard look at what King Solomon just did. Let's cut the living baby in half and give one half to one girl and the other half to the other girl, knowing full well that the baby is not going to survive this, and, they're going to get, half a baby, yay, what am I going to do with half a baby? So no, King Solomon here is not, by any definition, a callous bastard, okay? He is clever and cunning and shrewd, because he's pulling on the emotions of the two women to see where their heart is. How do we know this? We know this by the behavior and the response of the two prostitutes, the two hoes. At this, the woman to whom the living child belonged addressed the king because she felt so strongly toward her son. "Oh, my lord, give her the living child. You mustn't kill it." Are you paying attention? Did you see what just happened here? This lowly prostitute is willing to give up her own son for adoption to a woman who is miserable, making her life miserable. She would rather give up her own son so it would live. She would rather part with her own child so that it would live, even though it would appease the woman that's making her life a living hell. I don't know where you come from, but I'd call that super noble. That's like noble. That a prostitute would have this kind of ethic code. So in actuality, we don't necessarily see that the prostitute, the mom, has a love for her son as much as she has a love for life. You mustn't kill it. A love for life, a zeal for life, even. Zeal would be described as a fiery flame of passion, not to be confused with lust. That's not that kind of passion. So, even though it would make this woman who's making her life miserable happy, she would rather give up her own son over seeing it die. Which makes perfect sense, right? That's how a mom should act. I mean, what mother would want to harm her own child, right? Do you see where this is going? Let's look at prostitute number 2, shall we? The shady prostitute, the shady hoe. What does she say? Her response is rather nasty. It will be neither yours nor mine. Divide it up. Alright, stop. Does that sound like a motherly response to you? I ask you again, what mother would want to harm her own baby? What mother would want to harm anybody else's baby? Do you see where I'm going with this? So what does the king say? What does Solomon say? The king answered, "Give the living child to the first woman. Don't kill it because she is its mother." I think that's pretty self-explanatory here what just happened, right? Of course the king's gonna come to that conclusion because the woman acted like a mom. Not only did she act like a mom, but she acted like a person who loves life, who chooses life. Do you see where I'm going with this? My fellow believers and non-believers, my dear listeners, this is a direct pro-life, pro-choice argument straight out of the Bible. The first prostitute is clearly pro-life. She chose life. This woman was ready to give up motherhood in order for the baby to live, to give the baby, her own son, to a woman who was, for all intents and purposes, her enemy. But she chose life. She did not choose death, she chose adoption. Is this becoming crystal clear to you? Rather than choosing death, she chose adoption. She chose losing motherhood, over death, over murder of her baby. Now the shady prostitute number 2, the shady hoe, chooses death. It will be neither yours nor mine. Divide it up. Cut the baby in half, she says. This woman was all about murdering an innocent child, just for selfish reasons, just for self-gain. Now, who does this sound like to you? Who do these two prostitutes sound like to you, dear listener? The first prostitute clearly is the conservative woman approach, while the second prostitute is crystal clearly the progressive liberal approach. How many women do you see celebrating their abortions, and they're proud of their abortions? How many women you see killing their babies, choosing death of their baby over adoption, and they're proud of it, they're happy about it. So pardon me, when I turn on the television and I see the news at 9 and I see women celebrating their abortions and they're all happy and pleased with themselves that they killed their own baby, and then I read stories like this in the Bible about this woman, this shady prostitute number 2, I simply cannot help myself in drawing the conclusion that they are very similar. Now let's be clear, I'm not a heartless ass. I understand that certain medical procedures happen and emergencies happen, and there are plenty of women out there that have had to give up their baby for medical emergencies, and I don't want you to feel in one way, in any way, shape, or form, any kind of condemnation. That's not where I'm going with this. That's not directed to you. This is not directed to you. I'm talking about the women who wantonly murder their own babies for personal gain and satisfaction, that are proud of killing their own children. Not even thinking about adoption as an option here. Neither me, I won't have it, and you won't have it. Cut the baby in half. So adoption's not even on the table. I'm just gonna murder my baby just because I can. My body, my choice, right? But it's not your body, it's the baby's body. Do you see what happened here? Do you see how a story out of the Bible from 1 Kings translates directly into what's happening in American society today? And Western culture in general, but I'm going to focus on American society because I don't live anywhere else. I live in America right now, and I see things like Planned Parenthood, and here, let me show you this. I wonder how many of you noticed this, dear listeners. I wonder how many of you are paying attention. This was in the news, March 10th of 2022. If you do not believe me, you can Google this and see this for yourself, okay? So this is kind of sort of current because it's March 16th, so 6 days ago, all right? Babies could be killed 28 days after birth under proposed Maryland law, attorney warns. Here, I'm going to read you another headline from another website. Proposed law in Maryland would allow mothers to kill their babies up to 28 days after birth. Did you hear what I said? I'm not making this up. This is real. You are living in this kind of world. While you have people screaming about what's going on in the Ukraine, which is horrible, don't get me wrong, you have things like this popping up here in your own backyard. Proposed law in Maryland would allow mothers to kill their babies up to 28 days after birth. What? Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, are you kidding me right now? Do you see how this is tying into the biblical story that I just shared with you? I'm gonna ask this question again. What mother in her right mind would want to harm her own baby? What mother in her right mind would be okay with killing her baby 1 month after it's born? That's not abortion, that's murder. Now, some would argue that abortion is murder in the first place, which is probably pretty much is. But again, I can understand certain medical procedures, certain medical emergencies or procedures that might happen in the first term that would put the baby or the mom, baby and or mom in danger. You know, I get that. But this is absolutely sick. My fellow Americans, this is absolute insanity. Now, this is where certain groups of people would come at me and scream at me, well, what's the big deal? The God of the Bible murdered babies all the time. As I had mentioned previously, the God of the Bible commands the nation of Israel to wipe out entirely men, women, and children, whole entire nations like the Canaanites and the Amalekites and others. There's a reason why God does what he does, and I'm going to share something with you that's going to shed a little bit of light on the Canaanites. So before I share with you what the Canaanites did, I'm going to share with you who they are, or who they were. And I found an article on the interwebs from gotquestions.org, who were the Canaanites. The Canaanites were a group of ancient people who lived in the land of Canaan on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Canaan is described in the Bible as extending from Lebanon toward the Brook of Egypt in the south of the Jordan River and the Jordan River Valley in the east. In the Bible, notably in Genesis 10 and Numbers 34, this was called the land of Canaan and occupies the same area that is occupied by modern Lebanon and Israel, plus parts of Jordan and Syria. The Canaanites are mentioned over 150 times in the Bible. They were a wicked, idolatrous people descended from Noah's grandson, Canaan, who was the son of Ham. Genesis 9:18. Canaan was cursed because of his and his father's sin against Noah. Genesis 9:20-25. In some passages, Canaanites specifically refers to the people of the lowlands and the plains of Canaan, Joshua 11:3, and in other passages, Canaanites is used more broadly to refer to all the inhabitants of the land, including the Hivites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Perizzites. The Perizzites. See Judges 1:9-10. See, even I have trouble pronouncing all of this stuff. By the way, all of those names in Hebrew sound quite different. The land of Canaan was the land God promised to give to Abraham's descendants in Genesis 12:7. The Canaanites are described in the Bible as a large and fierce people, not easily defeated, so the Israelites would need divine help to come against them, defeat them, and take their land away. God promised Moses and Joshua that help in Joshua 1:3. After the Exodus, when the Lord told Moses to invade Canaan, Moses sent a group of spies into the land of Canaan to see what the people were like. The spies came back with a report that was both encouraging and daunting. The fruit of the land was huge. It took 2 men to carry back 1 cluster of grapes, Numbers 13:23, and the land was bountiful in many other ways. However, the Canaanites were strong, and the cities were large and fortified. Also, the Israelite spies had seen what they described as Nephilim, and the descendants of Anak, which actually is the Hebrew word for giant. There, in Numbers 13:28 and 33. Next to these fierce people, the Israelites saw themselves as grasshoppers, verse 33. In the end, the Israelites were so afraid of the Canaanites that they refused to go into the land God had promised to them. Only Joshua and Caleb were confident that God would help them defeat the Canaanites. Because of their unwillingness to trust God, that generation of Israelites was denied entry into Canaan. Numbers 14:30-35. After Moses' death, Joshua was called by God to lead the people of Israel through the Jordan River and into the Promised Land. The first city they came to was Jericho, a strong-walled city of the Canaanites. That's not entirely true. They came to a city called Ai. It's looked over. But, okay, so, anyway. They come to Jericho, strong-walled city of the Canaanites. Joshua believed God and told the people that God would drive the Canaanites out of the land so that Israel could take the land of Canaan. Joshua 3:10. The fall of Jericho was a supernatural event, as God overthrew that city in Joshua 6. This victory was a sign to the people of Israel and to the people of Canaan that God had given the land of Canaan to the Israelites. Right. So, now that we know who the Canaanites were, let me share with you what they did. Alright, so this next segment here is from SusanCAnthony.com, and it's about Canaanite culture. We know from the Bible and from experience, at least I know from experience, that God, Adonai Elohim, is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. The Bible, the Word of God, tells us this over and over and over again. A question I have been asked of the person who wrote this is, and I have been asked this myself, and I haven't really managed to procure a proper answer. Kind of hard to answer this on the spot. And most people who ask this question not in a position to actually learn anything, but they ask it to argue with you. But here is the answer. Question is, how could a good God command the Israelites to slaughter every man, woman, and child, and even animal in the cities of the Canaanite nations? Isn't this the same God that listed "Thou shalt not kill" in the 10 Commandments? In Deuteronomy 20:16-17, God does give these instructions to Israel. In the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them: the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, got it right this time, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Now, as some of you may know or not know, the 6th commandment is actually "Thou shalt not murder" rather than "Thou shalt not kill." In Hebrew, it's different. Lo tirtzach is not the same thing as lo taharog, and it does not say in Hebrew lo taharog, it says lo tirtzach. So what's the difference between lo taharog and lo tirtzach? Aha. Murder is premeditated, whereas killing can come in self-defense. So, there's the difference. Once you actually premeditate somebody's demise, that's where things get shady. Premeditated murder is the crime of wrongfully and intentionally causing the death of another human being after rationally considering the time or method of doing so in order to either increase the likelihood of success or to evade detection or apprehension. Interesting. Now I'm suddenly going back to the second prostitute who killed her baby by rolling over on it in the middle of the night and then stealing somebody else's baby and claiming it as her own. Premeditated murder is one of the most serious forms of homicide and is punished more severely than manslaughter or other types of homicide, often with a life sentence without possibility of parole, or in some countries, the death penalty. So my question is, how come abortion isn't considered premeditated murder? Alright, let's proceed with the article about the Canaanites. So, God does not call all killing murder. There is the self-defense aspect. But what about infants and tiny babies? The command says to kill everything that breathes. This is a judgment upon the people of Canaan, similar to the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah. What was going on in Canaan that was so bad that Adonai ordered even children killed? People who want reasons to reject the Bible often point to this as an immoral command, but we know God is perfectly righteous. How do you explain this? First of all, we need to remember that God, Adonai, Elohim, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, created us. He gave life, and it is his right to take it back. He is not accountable to us for what he chooses to do. We are accountable to him. And it really is a pride thing because, well, if you just continue to resist and continue to tell yourself that you can live this life without any help and then you could go through it alone, believe me when I tell you, well, you could, but it would suck. But people who are not ready to recognize the sovereignty of Adonai Elohim are essentially proud. And if you're proud, then everything that I'm talking about kind of goes out the window. Only when you realize, when you come to peace with the term that you have no control over your life. The world lies to you and makes you think that you have control over your life, but you really don't have any control over your life. And it's pretty rough trying to walk through this life absolutely alone. You can't really trust people because people seem to be too busy backstabbing you and lying to you and cheating on you and all kind of stuff like that. So, if you trust me when I say to you to trust in Adonai Elohim instead of people, watch what would happen if you were to do that. Take my challenge, dear listener, dear non-believing listener. Take my challenge and put your trust in Adonai Elohim instead of in people and see what happens. Okay, back to the Canaanites, yes? Alright, so where were we? Second, recall that the Canaanites had seen Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed completely. This was a warning that God, Adonai, would judge wickedness. So many horrible things were happening in Sodom that the angel of the Lord said this in Genesis 18, verses 20 to 21. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, in Hebrew it's Sdom va'Amorah. The outcry against Sdom va'Amorah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they had done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. Wow, that's a bold statement. What can you possibly lose by trying what I suggest to you right now, O atheist of America, providing that you're listening to this? Most likely, if an atheist were to listen to this, they would probably be doing it to mock and tear apart. But just in case there is an atheist or an agnostic person that is happened to stumble upon these podcast episodes by freak accident, take my challenge. It's not gonna hurt. You're not gonna burst into flames. Take my challenge and put your trust in Adonai Elohim instead of in people. And I'm curious to know if your life starts to improve. You can always leave a message or a note for me on my website, www.findinghigherground.org. Okay, Canaanites. So, what did we say? I'm gonna read Genesis 18:20 to 21 again. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin is so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. It was. Ancient stories give hints about the evil in Sodom. Strangers and travelers who came into the city would be robbed, stripped, and held captive within the city. They would wander the streets, slowly starving to death, to the great amusement of the citizenry. One account relates that visitors to Sodom were offered a bed according to the Middle Eastern laws of hospitality, but it was a bed of torture. Short people were stretched, tall people had their legs cut off. If a traveler had no money, he would be given bricks of gold and silver with his name on them, but nobody would sell him any bread or water, even for all that gold and silver, so the traveler would slowly die of starvation. The Sodomites gathered around the corpse and took back the gold and silver. The people in Sodom were not just evil, they were proud of being evil. Imagine being a child in a place like that. With the way how things are going today in America kind of sort of sounds like Sodom. No? I think so. Imagine being a child growing up in America. Pretty chaotic, if you ask me. Okay, I digress. These stories give us a hint of how bad things had gotten in Sodom. It was probably worse than our imaginations can conceive. It was probably worse than our imaginations can conceive. The Canaanites knew about the destruction of Sodom. They knew that God would judge evil. They also knew about Melchizedek and Avraham. Now, I did say that there was going to be a podcast regarding this character Melchizedek and the priesthood of Melchizedek. It's very, very possible that I now have an idea for episode 11 of Finding Higher Ground. So, yeah, maybe. But anyway, they had access to the truth. They knew what was going on. They weren't ignorant or innocent. Egypt and other nations, despite their great sin, were not completely destroyed, so the sin of the Canaanites must have been more serious. God restricted Israel from attacking Edom, Moab, and Ammon, so despite their sins, they must not have deserved such a severe judgment. Leviticus 18 and 20 lists some of the detestable religious practices of the Canaanites and says that these acts were caused. Let me read that again, sorry. Leviticus 18 and 20 lists some of the detestable religious practices of the Canaanites. It says that these acts caused the land to become defiled so that its inhabitants were quote-unquote vomited out. This comes with the warning that if the Israelites copy those practices, the land will also vomit them out. This is exactly what happened after the Israelites adopted the practices of Canaan. So stop, I want to draw a comparison here. So here we are in America these days, and we're killing babies left, right, and center because of abortion centers and whatnot. And more and more people are pushing to kill babies during pregnancy and now after pregnancy. As I mentioned before, there's this Maryland bill, and this representative is offering this law to pass a law that would allow mothers to kill their babies 28 days after they're born. I am not making this up. I didn't even wish I was, because that's just totally demented. And it shouldn't even be a thing. It shouldn't even be brought up to the government for discussion. Why is this even talked about? It's insanity. What happens if somebody doesn't want to take care of their 2-year-old anymore? Like, where does it stop? Where does this insanity stop? So I just read to you that this comes with a warning that if the Israelites copy the practices of the Canaanites, the land will also vomit them out. And here we are, we're practicing very Canaanite-esque habits by disposing of our children, and now we're losing our freedoms, and it's becoming harder and harder to be a free American in America. So, I wonder if there's a pattern here. Because if we're not careful, dear listeners, if we're not careful and we don't play our cards right, we are going to lose everything. Archaeology gives some hints about what the Canaanites did. On one high place, listen to this, boys and girls. On one high place, archaeologists found several stone pillars and great numbers of jars containing remains of newborn babies. When a new house was built, a child would be sacrificed and its body built into the wall to bring good luck to the rest of the family. Firstborn children were often sacrificed to Moloch, a giant hollow bronze image in which a fire was built. Remember that name, Moloch. Remember that name later, okay. A giant hollow bronze image in which a fire was built. Parents placed their children in its red-hot hands, and the babies would roll down into the fire. The sacrifice was invalid if a parent displayed grief. Mothers were supposed to dance and sing. The Israelites later copied this practice in a valley near Jerusalem called Gehenna. I've been there. I have been there many, many, many times to this little valley. It's not a big, huge valley. Don't think like Grand Canyon. It's a very small valley, but it's a valley that's right in between the old city of Jerusalem and Mishkanot Sha'ananim, the first neighborhood outside of the walls, the first neighborhood built outside of the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. I think it's in the 19th century. There's a building there called the Cinematheque, the Jerusalem Cinematheque. It's in Gai Ben Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom. And I would walk through this place almost every other morning in my high school years when I would feel led by, well, what I know now to be Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, would lead me to the old city of Jerusalem, to the Jewish quarter, to the Kotel, so that I could pray and worship my God in my own fashion, in the most appropriate place a Jewish person can worship his God, which would be the Kotel, the Wailing Wall, the last remaining structure of the temple. It's not the wall of the temple itself, it is the piece of the outer wall that was around the temple. But again, I digress. Now, when we read about what these Canaanites did to their children, it sounds pretty horrible, doesn't it? But is our culture superior? Is our culture, the American culture, any better? The author goes to say that they were shocked to learn that in the United States there are more than 3,600, that's 3,600 abortions every day, day after day. The number of legal abortions every year far exceeds the number of U.S. soldiers killed in every war since the nation began. That is disgusting. There was a great deal of sexual sin among the Canaanites. They believed that cultic prostitution was important to encourage their gods, Baal and Ashtoret, to mate, so that the land would be fertile and rain would come. Venereal disease may have been rampant. Many young people forced into prostitution were abused to the point of death. Even the surrounding pagan nations were appalled by Canaanite religious practices. Yet, Adonai did not hurry to judge the Canaanites. In Genesis 15:16, Adonai tells Avraham, In the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. God gave the Canaanites 400 years while Israel was in Egypt. After Israel passed through the Red Sea, he waited 40 more years while Israel wandered in the wilderness. The people of Canaan knew Israel was coming and that God had given the land to them, according to Rachav, a Canaanite prostitute, in Joshua 2:9. I know, quote, I know that Adonai has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you, end quote. Jericho had 6 additional days to repent while Israel did laps around it. The day judgment finally came to Jericho, Israel marched around the city 7 times. Adonai judges swiftly when he finally acts, but he patiently warns and allows time for repentance. Families who wished could have migrated out of the land and settled in nearby areas. God said repeatedly that he would drive out the inhabitants of the land before Israel. Those who wished to leave had time and opportunity. The point was to destroy the evil Canaanite culture rather than the individual Canaanite people. Only individuals who stubbornly refused to leave were destroyed with military force, along with their children who could not have survived without parents. God gave no instructions to hunt down and kill Canaanites who left the land peacefully. Later in the Bible, Canaanite individuals like Uriah Hittite, Uriah the Hittite, shows up. The Hittite? He shows up as a righteous character. Rahab the prostitute herself, was a Canaanite harlot who repented before Jericho was destroyed. She is an ancestor of Yeshua himself. God's judgment was not based on racism or favoritism. Okay, I'm going to read that again for all the liberal snowflakes to hear, to pay attention. God's judgment was not based on racism or favoritism. And before you go ahead and label me a Republican, then wrong answer, because I'm not one of those either. They're a bunch of inept fools that are just standing by idly, letting the Democrats burn the country to the ground and run the country to the ground. And I used to be a Republican, but then I woke up and I grew up and I realized that I don't know what they're doing either, okay? Both parties need a serious shakedown and purging. Let's leave it at that. Adonai Elohim, the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, is never arbitrary or unjust, despite how some events appear at first glance. Pause. Remember the king, King Solomon, in the biblical story of 1 Kings 3, verses 16 to 28. Remember when King Solomon said, hey, get me a sword so I can cut this baby in half? It sounded horrible, now doesn't it? But there was a reason why King Solomon acted like that. So we can conclude from this that King Solomon is kind of like a god character here in the story. The same people who are angry because God doesn't do anything about all the evil in the world are the first to cry foul when he exacts judgment. All you people who do that, you know who you are. However, those of us who know him trust that his justice is perfect. He knows all the aggravating and mitigating circumstances. We do not. His patience and forgiveness are immense. He waits for repentance. He gives people an opportunity to choose between salvation and judgment. He won't wait forever. Judgment at some point is certain. Now I'm glad that I brought back up the story with the king and the 2 hoes, because we're going to go back to the behavior of these 3 characters. We're going to revisit the character of the shady hoe, the second prostitute. Clearly, we can see by the behavior and the attitude of the second shady prostitute that she's acting kind of sort of somewhat Canaanite-esque at that moment, right? You'd agree with me. Cut the baby in half. I'm not gonna have her, and you're not gonna have her too. Cut the baby in half. She doesn't sound too unhappy about losing the baby. Now, you have something really funny going on here between these two prostitutes. One prostitute, the good prostitute, is willing to give up her own son for the benefit of the son's life. She's willing to give up her own motherhood so that the son will live. Whereas in the behavior of the other shady prostitute, this one doesn't want to give anything. As a matter of fact, she did the opposite. She took the baby, the living baby, out of the real mother's bed, and now she's willing to take the baby's life. So she's a taker. The first prostitute is a giver. Now, while I was meditating and contemplating on this whole entire passage, I looked at it and something just struck me. And suddenly I saw this as an analogy of the first prostitute being Israel in a way, and the second prostitute being the Gentiles. And then Romans 11 came back into my mind. And I'm thinking to myself, or maybe Ruach HaKodesh is showing this to me. But what I got to was that the first prostitute is willing to give her baby to the second prostitute so that it can live. What if the baby is the good news of the salvation of Yeshua the Messiah? And since a bad tree cannot produce good fruit, this second prostitute is a bad tree and her baby dies. So what does she do? She steals the first baby. She takes the baby out of the mom's bed and makes it her own. And it sounds a lot to me as if kind of sort of like the Gentiles taking the gospel of Messiah Yeshua, the good news of salvation of Messiah Yeshua, which is in essence Jewish, by Jews, for Jews, because Messiah Yeshua is Jewish, and the Gentiles have made the gospel, with that Greek word, into its own. So when Israel looks upon its child, the gospel, and sees a dead baby, realizing that that dead baby is not even hers, she naturally, like any good mother, wants her child back. She wants her baby back. No, this is not a Chili's commercial. And if you just launched into the baby back ribs commercial from Chili's, there's something wrong with you. But you're my kind of people. Anyway, first hoe wants her baby back. So, that to me sounds like us Messianic Jews claiming our birthright and inheritance back. We would like to have our Yeshua back, please. Thank you very much. But we want to have him back in a Jewish context, not in a Gentile context. And this is what I see here happening, is that this story of 1 Kings 3:16 to 28 is actually showing me a mirror of what the Gentiles have been doing with the good news of salvation of Messiah Yeshua. A Psarah shel Yeshua HaMashiach. This is exactly what happened. I feel like the Gentile church has taken the living baby from the mother's bed, the real mother's bed, and has claimed this baby for its own, and it doesn't want to give it back. And it's never really been your baby in the first place. It's always been the baby of the first mom. But look, the first mom was willing to give up the baby and give up her motherhood so that the other woman would have it. It will neither be yours nor mine. Divide it up. The Gentile church leaders of the world, and specifically America, by staying quiet and not actively acknowledging the Jewishness of the gospel, the good news of Messiah Yeshua, seemingly claim parenthood or ownership over this living child, who to me is the symbol of the living good news of Messiah Yeshua. When the moment of judgment and truth was presented, the second prostitute offered gladly to divide up the good news, rendering it to no one, not to the Gentiles nor to the Jews. In contrast to the first prostitute's appeal to let life live, even if it means to sacrifice her own parenthood or mothership, ownership over this child, over the good news of salvation. The first prostitute is the model of which Abba would call us to be, just without the prostituting part. But Abba, Father God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is looking for such character in us, that we, the bride of Messiah, that used to be a prostitute but has repented and found redemption and deliverance, and this is a reoccurring theme in the prophets and the writings. Abba wants us to be a bride, such a type of bride of Messiah, that we would be willing to give up and sacrifice the very thing closest to us for the sake of an abundant life in Messiah Yeshua. Even though this woman displays poor judgment in her regards to her daytime occupation, she has the heart of a queen of Israel. See Esther as an example. Now, I've noticed when I look at my Anchor dashboard on both my Anchor app and my PC desktop, I noticed that a majority of my listeners are female. And I'm going to ask you, do you seem this proper to want to harm your own child or anybody else's child for that matter? Does this seem okay to you or logical to you? Because it doesn't to me. What kind of a person are you if you have to wake up in the morning and come up with brand new lies to tell people that you claim to love? I am pleading before you, Gentile leaders of the body of Messiah, not be like the second hoe. Don't be shady. Don't be shady. Don't try to steal something that's not yours and claim it as your own. Why don't we return it to the rightful owner, to the real mother? I mean, if you're not going to really care for it and watch it get split up into 50,000 different denominations, then you might as well give it back to the rightful mother, to the actual Jews, who this good news belongs to. Don't get me wrong, this good news of salvation in Messiah Yeshua is for everyone, but it is for the Jew first, and then for the non-Jew. And if the nations of the world benefit from Israel's stubborn rejection of Messiah Yeshua, how much more would they benefit if Israel came into the fulfillment of Messiah Yeshua's promises? Then why is everything being done to keep the Jews away from knowing the truth about their own Messiah? As long as you, leaders of the Gentile body of Messiah, do not deliver an authentic Jewish message that Messiah Yeshua is Jewish and he came for the Jews, and that everything in the book, the New Covenant, happens for Jews and to Jews and by Jews, then the Jewish people will not be provoked to jealousy in their own Messiah, and you yourselves are withholding prophecy from becoming fulfilled. Now, if you recall in the very beginning of this podcast, I kind of hinted that all of this has something to do with Hillary Clinton and one Saul Alinsky, and I want to go down that rabbit hole for a little bit, so indulge me. But Mr. Manic Messianic, what does this all have to do with Hillary Clinton? What all of this can possibly do with Hillary Clinton and this Saul Alinsky character and the Democrat National Party and Lucifer and all of this? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you the opinion you've never asked for, and because I'm Jewish, you get another bonus free opinion. How about that? Now, my dear listener, I am going to read to you out of an article called The Hillary Alinsky Lucifer Connection by a one Paul Kengor, and it was published July 26, 2016 at seemingly 12 midnight. And it goes something along the lines of this. In his speech at the Republican convention last week, Ben Carson had made a statement that raised some eyebrows. Now, one of the things that I have learned about Hillary Clinton is that one of her heroes, her mentors was Saul Alinsky. A-L-I-N-S-K-Y. Saul Alinsky, said Carson, and her senior thesis was about Saul Alinsky. This was someone she greatly admired. So far so good, nothing most political junkies haven't heard before. And then he says, and let me tell you something about Saul Alinsky, continued Carson. He wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, and it acknowledges Lucifer, the original radical who gained his own kingdom. Now think about that. That certainly got a lot of people thinking. This is our nation where our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, talks about certain inalienable rights that come from our Creator, a nation where our Pledge of Allegiance says we are one nation under God, added Carson. This is a nation where every coin in our pockets and every bill in our wallet says, in God we trust. Something that I, yours truly the Manic Messianic, has a small problem with, and I can talk about that. I don't think that in God we trust should be in our money. I think it should be taken off of our money, unless the God that we trust in is money. If the God that we trust in is money, then it should stay on our money, because that's what we seem to put our trust in. Americans put their trust in money far more than they put in the God of the Hebrews. Change my mind. Okay, so let's go back to Hillary Clinton, this Saul Alinsky character, and Lucifer, which is not his real name. Lucifer is an invention. Let's get this straight. I'm gonna put this to rest right now. The name Lucifer does not exist. It is Latin. It means light bearer. But it's not his name in the original Hebrew, because the Bible was not written in Latin. It was written in Hebrew. So in Hebrew, his name is Hillel ben Shachar. In the book of Isaiah, in the 14th chapter and the 12th verse, we see it says, how did you come to fall from the heavens, morning star, son of the dawn? Stop. Guess what? That was out of the Complete Jewish Bible, and I'm not even crazy about that translation. Even though I'm such an avid fan of the Complete Jewish Bible, right? Why am I not too thrilled about this translation either? I'll tell you. So glad you asked. So I, of course, in faith, because the Bible tells me that I can do this, I approached Abba and I asked him, what does this name, Hillel ben Shachar, mean? The Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, responded with this. The word or name Hillel, as opposed to Hillel, means to boast, or the boastful one. The word Hillel, not Hallel, means to praise. Isn't it amazing that one vocalization or one pronunciation in the Hebrew language can completely change the meaning of a word? Okay, so Hallel, the boastful one, or to boast, as opposed to Hillel, meaning to praise. So how did I know that this was true? I referred to a Strong's Concordance to actually look at the word, Hallel. Strong's Concordance. What is a Strong's Concordance, Mr. Manic Messianic? Let's ask Almighty Google and find out. Hey Google. What is a Strong's Concordance?
According to Wikipedia, the exhaustive concordance of the Bible, generally known as Strong's Concordance, is a Bible concordance, an index of every word in the King James Version, constructed under the direction of James Strong.
So basically, you can look up the meaning and definition of every single Hebrew and Greek word in the Bible with the Strong's Concordance. Okay? So I looked up the word Hillel, and sure enough, let's do that together, so just so that you can see that I'm not crazy. Well, maybe a little bit crazy. But here, I'll show you. As best as I can through your speaker. So I typed in Isaiah 14:12 into my search engine into my phone, and this is what I got back. Strong's Concordance. Hillel, a shining one. Original word Hillel, part of speech, noun masculine, transliteration Hillel, definition a shining one. I'm not too convinced, but we'll go with that. NAS, New American Standard Exhaustive Concordance. Word origin from halal. Okay, let's keep on scrolling down. Let's look up the meaning of the word, the origins of the word halal, shall we? So I'm gonna tap on this. Scrolling down a little bit, Brown Driver Briggs. One is to shine, verb shine. Okay. Then there's another one, to be boastful. Ah, there you go. So there it is, to be boastful. So the word Hillel means to be boastful, one who boasts. Ben Shachar, translated, would be the son of the dawn, or the one who emanates from the dawn. Now, what dawn is being talked about here? The dawn would be the first dawn ever created, which was when Abba and the Son and the Ruach HaKodesh, all three in together in unison, said, Vayehi Or, let there be light. This is the first dawn, which is exactly what the adversary has been doing ever since the beginning of time, which was to boast against the throne of God. It says this in Isaiah 14:12-13. How did you come to fall from the heavens, morning star, son of the dawn? How did you come to be cut down to the ground, conqueror of nations? You thought to yourself, I will scale the heavens, I will raise my throne above God's stars. I will sit on the mount of assembly far away in the north. Anyway, dear listener, the point is that if you do the research yourself, you will find out that the word Lucifer is a translation of a translation, and it is not actual name of the adversary. Now that I've somewhat clarified the origins of the name Lucifer, we can go back to what we were talking about. Hillary Clinton, Saul Alinsky, and the devil. So we were talking about Ben Carson going off about Hillary Clinton. He was saying this. This is our nation, where our founding document, the Declaration of Independence, talks about certain inalienable rights that come from our Creator, a nation where our Pledge of Allegiance says we are one nation under God, added Carson. This is a nation where every coin in our pocket and every bill in our wallet says, in God we trust. We talked about this. So are we willing to elect someone as president who has as their role model somebody who acknowledges the devil, Satan? Think about that. Now you got to remember that this was back in 2016, so Hillary was still running for president at that time. Now, as you can probably guess, the liberal-run and owned media absolutely lost their minds when Carson said this statement. Now, this person who wrote this article goes on to say that I'm going to continue to read. I must say that I shouldn't be too critical of the liberal media's apoplectic reaction, because I was likewise incredulous the first time I heard this claim. It was in 2007, and I was finishing a book on the faith of Hillary Clinton. One morning I heard a local radio talk show host make an amazing claim that Alinsky's 1971 classic Rules for Radicals began with a dedication to Satan. Oh, I can't believe that, I said. I was angry at the host. This kind of hyperbole gives conservative talk radio a bad name. And yet, it couldn't be hard to check. I had better do so as author of a biography of Hillary Clinton in which I had a section on Hillary and Saul Alinsky. As part of the promotion for the book, I would likely appear on the same talk show, and the host surely would ask me about the Lucifer acknowledgement. I quickly emailed one of the staffers at our library in Grove City College. Did we have a copy of Rules for Radicals on our shelves? We sure did. Please pull it, I said. I'll be right there. I opened the book and couldn't believe my eyes. Alinsky offered this acknowledgement. Now I'm going to read it, the actual quote that's in the book. Lest we forget at least one... Okay, let me start again. Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history. The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Yes, there it was. Saul Alinsky commenced his magnum opus, the one for which he is hailed by the left, a book not only read by Hillary Clinton but used as a text by Barack Obama as a teacher of community organizing with an acknowledgement to the devil. Like Ben Carson, the reaction I've had when pointing this out to liberals has been one of hysterical disbelief. And if I'm able to get them to look at what Alinsky wrote, they retreat to handy excuses. Oh, that was tongue-in-cheek, one liberal confidently told me. Really? I asked her. How did she know that? She didn't. Now, a crucial clarification. I don't think it's technically accurate to say that Rules for Radicals is dedicated to Lucifer, as is often claimed by Alinsky's detractors. It's also hard to criticize them for making that assumption. Looking at the book carefully, it appears to be dedicated to one person. There is a page that simply says, "To Irene," and nothing else. On the page prior to the Irene dedication is a list of personal acknowledgments, where Alinsky lists 4 friends: Jason Epstein, Cicely Nichols, Susan Rabiner, and Georgia Harper. Following the Irene page is another page, the controversial one, in which Alinsky offers 3 quotes. The first from a Rabbi Hillel, the famous Rabbi Hillel. The second from Thomas Paine, pardon me, and the third from Alinsky himself giving his nod to Lucifer. One well-known fact-checker source, Snopes, don't get me started on Snopes, describes this as 3 epigraphs on an introductory page. I suppose that's an acceptable way to characterize it, and the third of the 3 is an epigraph, if you will, to Satan. But we shouldn't let Alinsky off the Lucifer hook so easily. Alinsky, for one, was asked about the Lucifer acknowledgement in his March 1972 interview with Playboy magazine near the end of his life, a swan song that every Alinsky aficionado knows about. Here's the exchange, which came at the very end of the interview, with Playboy apparently judging it in a fittingly provocative close to the extremely lengthy interview. So Playboy asks him, "Having accepted your own mortality, do you believe in any kind of afterlife?" So this Mr. Saul Alinsky says this: "Sometimes it seems to me that the question people should ask is not, is there life after death, but is there life after birth? I don't know whether there's anything after this or not. I haven't seen the evidence one way or the other, and I don't think anybody else has either. Lie. But I do know that man's obsession with the question comes out of his stubborn refusal to face his own mortality." That's kind of true. Let's say that if there is an afterlife, and if I have anything to say about it, I will unreservedly choose to go to hell. This is his own words. Playboy asks him why. Alinsky, "Hell would be heaven for me. All my life I've been with the have-nots. Over here, if you're a have-not, you're short on dough. You're short of dough, sorry. If you're a have-not in hell, you're short of virtue. Once I get into hell, I'll start organizing the have-nots over there." Playboy, "Why them?" Alinsky, "They're my kind of people." "They're my kind of people," said Alinsky. "Hell would be heaven for me." Tongue-in-cheek again. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. Remember, dear listener of mine, serious seeker of truth, this person, Saul Alinsky, who just said all of this, was a mentor to Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. For the record, when I googled the Alinsky Playboy interview this week, I found the aforementioned excerpt posted at, amongst other places, a Satanist website. There, the author, in an article titled Saul D. Alinsky, a Role Model for Left-Wing Satanists, writes of the exchange. I'm not sure whether Alinsky really was a Satanist Luciferian of some sort or whether he was just joking. He may have well been just joking. Maybe. Pretty funny, huh? When fact-checking Ben Carson's statement on this, PolitiFact added this caveat. The rest of the book, Rules for Radicals, includes no real discussion of Lucifer or Satan, though it does talk about the way people demonize political opponents so that others see their opponents as devils. Indeed it does. And that isn't particularly amusing either. One of Alinsky's most infamous rules is to isolate the target and in effect demonize it. The talk show host I had mentioned also used the word demonize. Well, that's really, really funny because that's kind of sort of what they did with President Trump. They found a target and they demonized it. They found President Trump and they demonized him. They made him look like the enemy number one, public enemy number one. He's the most important person to be hating right now. And now we're finding out all of this truth coming out to light, that it was Hillary Clinton that actually did spy on him while he was in the White House and before he was in the White House. Now we're finding out that Hunter Biden's laptop is actually a real thing. The New York Times confirmed it. Remember that one time when a certain someone said that was Russian disinformation? All this stuff, all these stories about Hunter Biden's laptop? Russian disinformation, right? This was the thrust of Alinsky's final and most egregious rule for radicals, number 13. Quote, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. They did that with President Trump and all the people who voted for him. Now they want to do it to people who are not vaccinated. He advised cutting off the support network of the person and isolating the person from sympathy. He cruelly urged going after people rather than institutions because people hurt faster than institutions. Get out the torch, dear tolerant progressive, rain hellfire on thine enemy. The author of this article's colleague from Grove City College, a person by the name of Lee Wishing, interprets this as Alinsky's method of trying to reach the younger 60s generation. He wanted to give them meaning, says Wishing. It was as if Alinsky had penned the radicals' version of a purpose-driven life. On the last page of Alinsky's manual, the godfather of community organizing imparts his wisdom on his army of organizers. Quote, the human cry is one for a meaning, a purpose of life, a cause to live for and if need be, die for. This is literally the revolution of the soul, end quote. Alinsky said that the young are, quote, searching for an answer, at least for a time, to man's greatest question. Why am I here? End quote. In short, observes Wishing, Alinsky was telling his followers to find life's meaning and salvation in a, quote, conflict-based community organizing, unquote. This is Wishing's description. Wishing's take is that Alinsky was actually a metaphysical rebel, a spiritual man who, whether he realizes it or not, was trying to address man's fallen nature. Thus, Alinsky gets his opening acknowledgement to Lucifer wrong, says Wishing. Jesus, Yeshua, is the kingdom winner, the real revolutionary. The fatal flaw of Alinsky's book is literally the fatal flaw of mankind. Failure to recognize that Yeshua has defeated Satan and that although this world is fallen, our hope is in him, following him faithfully, the true radical, not Satan, end quote. Wishing's take is insightful and also charitable to Alinsky. Then this article proceeds to go into great detail about the ins and outs of how one Hillary Clinton A young Hillary Rodham was introduced to Alinsky in Chicago by one Reverend Don Jones, the liberal social justice Methodist youth minister who was a mentor to her in the early 1960s in Park Ridge, Illinois, at Park Ridge United Methodist Church. He's the one who started tugging Hillary to the left and away from her father's Goldwater Girl roots. Hillary would later describe Alinsky as a great seducer of young minds, as did Jones, which was apparently the reason that Jones brought his wide-eyed teens to meet with the radical whose politics Jones liked. Jones succeeded, Hillary was taken in. The Reverend Jones's point in bringing the youngsters to Alinsky could not have been religious, since Alinsky was a well-known and committed agnostic who proudly declared his independence from any affiliation, including Christianity. The youth minister's goal was social-political. Like Jones, Alinsky was dedicated to advancing the interests of the proletariat, or what Alinsky called the have-nots. For Hillary, that first encounter was just the beginning. Oh, this is a little interesting piece of information. Hillary Rodham headed off to the northeast for college. Sorry that I'm driving you bananas with all of this stuff about Hillary Clinton, but bear with me, it's important. Hillary Rodham headed off to the northeast for college, where her conservative father paid handsomely for her left-wing indoctrination. So she caught on to the idea of using capitalism to forward socialism very early on in her career. I get it now, all is clear. In 1968, Hillary wrote her undergraduate thesis at Wellesley on, of all subjects, Saul Alinsky and his tactics. She quite literally studied Alinsky and not merely distantly from the pages of a book. At Wellesley, Hillary sought out Alinsky. She was thinking about her place in the world. She envisioned greater things and thus decided that she needed more than a bachelor's degree, namely a degree in law. She shared that opinion with no less than Saul Alinsky himself, directly asking his advice. And her outreach paid dividends. Quite remarkably, the veteran radical offered Hillary a job in the spring of 1969 as a community organizer. Hey, wait a minute. Wasn't one Barack Hussein Obama a community organizer too? The similarities are uncanny. I won't continue with this article from this point on, but you kind of get the idea that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have a long history with this one Saul Alinsky, who might have not necessarily encouraged devil worship, but the fact that he acknowledged the adversary in his book Rules for Radicals, that should raise a lot of eyebrows. So what does all of this, Hillary Clinton, Saul Alinsky, blah blah blah, what does this all have to do with 1 Kings 3, 16:28 and cutting a baby in half? Everything. Study the second prostitute and her attitude and her nature, about how nonchalant and indifferent she was, that she rolled over her own child and then had no scruples stealing somebody else's child and making it her own, and then proceeds to encourage the child getting murdered and having half of a baby. If this behavior does not echo and even reflect this obsession that Democrats have with murdering children wantonly, without any kind of remorse or regret, up to the point where a mother can dispose of her child 28 days after it's born, if you can't see there's a connection here, that we're no better than the Canaanites with this attitude towards baby killing, if you think it's okay to dispense of babies, thousands and thousands of babies every day, and then turn around and expect God to bless this country, if you claim to believe in Messiah Yeshua, yet you're totally okay and support the idea of aborting, this isn't even abortion, this is straight up murder. If you're alright with all of this, then you really need to sit down with yourself and think about your life. If there are any of you amongst my female listeners that have been voting Liberal Democrat for the last few years, and that you happen to stumble upon these podcasts, especially this episode, I urge you to really, really think and look inside your heart and ask yourself, if you claim to be a believer in Messiah Yeshua, you cannot support anything to do with murdering children at the end of their third term of pregnancy, and then especially at birth or 28 days after their birth. You cannot be okay with this. People really need to ask themselves, why are the Democrats obsessed with pushing legal murder of children? Why indeed? Back in 2017, they forwarded a bill that allowed them to abort up to the point of birth. Now they want to so-called abort 28 days after the baby's born. This is not abortion. This is murder. It's borderline Nazi Germany kind of murder. And this is not an exaggeration. What we are doing in this country to babies is straight up genocide. Dear listener, believer and non-believer alike, I would very much like to commend you if you've gotten this far in my rant against abortion and straight up wanton murder of babies. It's not really abortion, I keep on saying abortion, but murdering a baby 28 days after its birth is not abortion. There's no way that you can change my mind on this. I'm going to ask you now if you feel it. Do you feel it after listening to me go on and on about all of this for the last 1 hour and 42 minutes? Do you feel it? Because if you do feel it, then that feeling that you're feeling is called being red-pilled. Remember what I said to you in the very beginning of this podcast regarding the red pill and the blue pill? Well, you, dear listener, are being red-pilled, whether you like it or not. Where do you think that term came from? Where do you think the term came from, being red-pilled? It came from the Matrix. And notice that the colors are the same colors of our political parties, red being Republican and blue being liberal. Liberal, progressive left, Democrat. So, you know, red pill for Republican, conservative-based people that really know what's going on, as opposed to blue, the Democrats, who are quote-unquote woke and think that they're part of the solution when they're the ones that are causing the problem. Really, really sorry if you don't like that coming out of my mouth, but it's the truth. The truth hurts. And no one knows this fact that the truth hurts better than Messiah Yeshua himself. Think that cross didn't hurt? You think it didn't hurt him carrying that cross all around Jerusalem while being beaten and having rocks thrown at him and being spat on? And then after all of that, he was crucified to it. Truth hurts, ladies and gentlemen, my dear listeners, believer and non-believer. The truth hurts. It is ugly. But I'd rather live an ugly truth than a pretty lie. I have found a very interesting article here. I'm going to touch this very quickly. Jeffress suggests Democrats may worship pagan god Moloch, who allowed for child sacrifice. Quote unquote, who allowed for child sacrifice. This is back from October 2nd, 2019, and it's coming from The Hill. Okay? I'm going to read that again. Jeffress suggests Democrats may worship pagan god Moloch, quote, who allowed for child sacrifice. Pastor Robert Jeffress praised President Trump in an interview as the, quote, most pro-religious liberty president the country has ever had, while also suggesting that the Democrats might worship, quote, the pagan god of the Old Testament, Moloch, unquote, who he added, allowed for child sacrifice. I won't go into too crazy depth of this article because, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to post the link to it on my website so that you can take a look at it yourself. But just the fact that that headline is even a real thing in an actual newspaper or news outlet, that should raise some questions, because I just went through very lengthy description about Moloch and the Canaanites. So here's your connection. Here is where all the dots connect and everything becomes clear. So I'm going to ask you, my dear listener, believer and non-believer, are you getting red-pilled yet? Are you seeing what's going on? Are you beginning to understand? Are you beginning to see? Are you beginning to see how all the dots connect and how all the pieces fit together? Are you beginning to see how the Word of God, Dvar Adonai, is relevant to this day and age and the things that happen today? Because it deals with human nature, and human nature does not change. It doesn't matter if it's 1 year or 1,000, human nature doesn't change, and the Word of God deals with this very human nature. Now, I thought about adding, the first chapter of reading Moses seeing Jesus right after this whole segment, but I had no idea it was going to take me an hour and 45 minutes to do that. So I am going to go ahead and leave you now, and I will be back very shortly with episode 11, which will talk about the first chapter of reading Moses seeing Jesus, which is called The Torah Anticipates Lawbreaking, and it's very, very interesting, and you're going to love it, I promise. So, I'm going to bid you adieu. I'm going to say shalom to you. I'm going to bid you peace, and I'm going to leave you with the Aaronic blessing. Yivarchecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yechunecha. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom b'shem Yeshua HaMashiach. May Adonai bless you and keep you. May Adonai shine his face upon you and be gracious unto you. May Adonai lift his face upon you and give you his peace. In the name of Messiah Yeshua, his Son. Amen. As Messiah Yeshua loves you, so do I. Stay tuned for episode 11 of Finding Higher Ground. Shalom v'nishtamea.